As a child, I was shuttled back and forth between Vienna and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In Pittsburgh, I had friends and mentors to help me get by. In Vienna, I lived in the bubble of my little family, parents, a sister, and myself. We moved in isolation through the confusing world of post-war Austria, pulled this way and that by the whims of my artist father. Years later, I drove from Vienna to Linz to meet Peter Weibel at Ars Electronica. I had been asked by Bruno Latour to help convince Peter to mount an exhibition on iconoclasm at the ZKM. At that first meeting, I recognized in the enigmatic artist wanderer from Odessa the guide I wished I had had as a kid. I wished I had carried Die Mappe der Hundigkeit under my arm as I walked through the city that had been my father's home until 1938, when the Anschluss forced him into exile. Meeting Peter came too late to sort out my childhood, but Peter did teach me important lessons about the unheimliche Heimat that Vienna was for me. Bearing the soul takes practice and discipline. To register nervousness, expressive lines have to be practiced and mastered. Peter taught me this at the Leopold Museum in Vienna, surrounded by Egon Schiele's nudes and with cameras running for a documentary I was making for the BBC. First, Peter waved his hand over the hectic treatment of hairy genitals and armpits that punctuated Schiele's drawings. Then, like a forensic specialist indicating the angle of an entrance wound, he traced with his index finger the stuttering, penciled contours of arms, legs, and torsos that intervened between the scribbled trouble spots. Nervousness, Peter explained, was calculated theater. Schiele intended to dramatize sexual desire and anxiety, and to do so, he had practiced nervous-looking lines day after day, like a pianist running through scales. That discipline was both artistic and libidinal. It made his art a wondrously neurotic achievement. Ja, Peter said. He trained himself hour after hour. Peter delivered this lesson in his signature rapid-fire way of speaking. My BBC sound engineer, listening to our conversation through headphones, complimented me. "Joseph, I didn't know you understood Russian." "That wasn't Russian," I responded. "Peter Weibel was speaking English." "So what about you, Peter?" I asked on the drive from Linz to Vienna, with Bruno Latour in the car, smiling to himself at the good fortune that with Peter's support, the exhibition Iconoclash might actually be realized. "What about you, Peter? What were you thinking?" We were talking about how parents judge their children and what children feel when they're judged. I was thinking about how impossible it had been for me to do anything scandalous under my father's eye. I wondered at the scandalous performances of the Wiener Aktionisten with whom Peter is sometimes associated. I can't quote Peter exactly, but the gist of it was that, unnoticed by historians, there was always in all they did the presence of laughter. The intentions were serious, and a few in the group saw nothing funny in their actions, but as they plotted their performances and predicted how the Viennese might react, their brainstorming was sometimes accompanied by gales of laughter. This must have been a special kind of mirth, the sort Max Brod remembers about Franz Kafka. Reading to friends the opening chapter of The Trial in Draft, Kafka was so convulsed by laughter that he couldn't proceed. I seldom laugh as much as I do with Peter. Reporting on an exhibition I'd seen in Vienna that installed works by a contemporary artist in the galleries of a museum of old master paintings, I noted that the modern interventions were rather bad. No, said Peter seriously and emphatically. Joseph, they aren't bad. They are the worst. A special committee had chosen merely a bad artist for the commission, but the museum director was unimpressed. This is not bad enough, he said. We must find something far worse. So he fired his committee and found the very worst. Peter understood this race to the bottom undertaken by the bureaucrats of art. In 1966, he and his group applied to the Austrian government for travel funds. "You have nothing to do with art and culture. You aren't even artists," the Hofrat exclaimed, leafing through their portfolios. Peter admitted that maybe they were young and maybe they were insolent, but they were the legitimate heirs of Schiele and Kokoschka. To which the Hofrat replied, "But Herr Weibel, this is the problem. They weren't artists either. Thomas Bernhard describes meeting Wittgenstein's nephew along a toppled chain-link fence separating the grounds of the Nervenklinik from those of the Nervenklinik at Steinhof at the edge of the Wienerwald. In the early 1970s, my sister met her future husband at those very same spots. She, a patient at the Nerven, suffering near-fatal anorexia nervosa, he in treatment at the Lungen, recovering from some curious fungal infection, and both of them chain-smoking under the poplar trees, out of sight from the doctors. So Peter's last lesson was easy for me to digest. I was interested in why a few of the men who observed him, walked like a dog by valley export, offered him morsels of food to eat. It took Peter some time to understand my question and see anything particularly unusual in that gesture. Of course, there was plenty of laughter from the Viennese crowds. Cruel laughter, that's the antithesis of Peter's subversive irony. And the police were poised to arrest anything funny in the wrong sort of way. But there were also men who took the scene at face value. Ah, so he's reduced to this, and gave Peter sympathetically some scraps of food. There's nothing symbolic about crawling like a dog or about Lungen meeting Nerven in Vienna, that city of dreams. Master of the virtual realms of media, technology, and the simulacrum, Peter is a great realist, and I wished I'd known him as I tried to navigate the extended Nervenklinik of my childhood, but I'm so grateful to know him now.